So that means if Naveed is handing over to me, I should probably get started. So hopefully everybody can hear me okay and the internet will hold up tonight. Let's see. But let's kick off. Good evening, everybody. Welcome to the Results Grassroots Conference call for October. Personally, I cannot believe we're this far through the year already. For those that don't know me, but I think almost everyone here does, I'm the Executive Director of Results UK. My name is Aaron Oxley, and I'm just really pleased to welcome you to the call. Now, as per normal, we're recording the call tonight and we're going to post it on our website for anyone who's missed it to watch later. So do feel free to turn your video off if you'd rather not be in the recording. We also use automatic captions on these calls, and you should be able to turn those on and off for yourself. There should be a live transcript button down there at the bottom on the Zoom menu bar. So a big warm welcome to anybody who's new to Results and is joining this call for the first time. I want to make sure there's an opportunity for anybody new to do that, either by turning on your microphone and saying hi, or using the chat box. And if so, it'd be great to hear where you're calling in from. And it's also okay not to, and that's fine as well. So just give it a second for anybody new to say hello.
Hi there, I'm Azati. I'm calling from Oxford, and I just spoke with Naveed this morning.
Azati, great. Wonderful to have you with us tonight, and also from Oxford, lovely town. I see our guest speakers join us as well, which is excellent. I'll introduce you later, Anna, no need to jump on just yet. Anybody else want to say hi? No? Okay, let's jump in. So, as always, last bit of housekeeping, please do keep yourself muted during the call, and if you've got a question or a comment, please do use the chat box. We'll try to respond to that in real time. And we'll also collect any questions for our guest speakers that appear in the chat so that when we get to that part of the meeting, they're ready to roll. So before I start with my usual update on what's been going on in the world of international development and how to fix the work of Results to bring an end to global poverty, sorry. Goodness me. I just want to thank those of you who came to our national conference last month. It was great to see so many of you there, to catch some of you in the social sessions, and I hope you enjoyed the lineup of our speakers and found something interesting and challenging in what you heard. Personally, for me, it was thrilling to chair the session with Professor Jeffrey Sachs. He's probably the best known development economist in the world, and he had some really powerful things to say about how we continue to make progress ending global poverty, including big investments in health, nutrition, education, and infrastructure, and how advocacy around all of these things is vital. What he said really confirms to me that the mission we have at Results is the right one. I think Dale is going to say a bit more about the conference shortly, so I'm going to move on to my roundup of what's going on in the world that affects the work of Results. First, most of you will already know that we now have a new Secretary of State over at the Foreign, Commonwealth and Development Office, FCDO, Liz Truss, who took over from Dominic Raab in last month's reshuffle. I'm starting to lose count, but I think that's 7 different Secretaries of State in charge of international development in the last 5 years. Now, as advocates, we expect to have to rebuild relationships and help build a politician's knowledge and commitment to overcoming poverty each time there's a new political change. So even though 7 in 5 years seems pretty extreme, this is no exception. We're going to have to engage with the new Foreign Secretary and hope to do so very soon. What her appointment means for the future of the UK's international development programs isn't yet fully clear, though we were disappointed that neither she nor the Prime Minister attended President Biden's vaccine summit the week before last, even though they were both in the US at the time for the UN General Assembly. I think we may well hear more about that a little later this evening. But what is clear is that she's going to have to fight the Treasury quite hard to make sure that even further cuts to the official development assistance, that's ODA budget, aren't imposed. Earlier in the year, we heard from another development economist, Ian Mitchell, at the Centre for Global Development, who's recently written an article warning that that's a very real possibility, given the approach that's currently being taken by the Chancellor. We're going to put a link to that article in the chat box. It's a sobering but important read. We've also seen evidence recently that the cuts to ODA that have already happened have hit the poorest countries worst. The FCDO released its annual report this month, and the figures it released show that this result of the government's new strategy. It also showed that funding has dropped even for the things that the government has stated to be a priority, including global health and girls' education. And again, we're going to put a link to that article in the chat box too. This is obviously something we're going to need to keep our eye on. and we may be asking you to undertake further advocacy on this in the coming year if we're to see continued investment in some of the things that we all care about, including health, education, and economic opportunities for all. Now, the government spending review is expected later this month, and when that's announced, we will hopefully know the overall size of the planned international development budget for the coming year. Although the way the process works is at that stage, we're unlikely to learn much detail at all about the funding for specific programs. Of course, we're going to keep you updated on all of that as soon as we can. Last week, an important and influential cross-party committee of MPs, the Foreign Affairs Select Committee, slammed the government's ODA cuts, saying that reducing investment in global health systems and health workers is the wrong thing to do to protect the world from pandemics, and that the cuts should be reduced as soon as possible to increase our investment in global health systems, including medical research and more equitable access to COVID-19 vaccines. I'm going to quote from the summary of that report, which, although it isn't quite the language we'd use, it's absolutely something that we agree with. The quote says, "The newly merged Foreign, Commonwealth and Development Office has the opportunity to make gains in global health security. We are concerned that the government is squandering this opportunity by making ill-considered cuts to some global health programs. These risk being a dangerous, false economy that could endanger global Britain's reputation as a science superpower and force for good." End of quote. This whole report was a really powerful intervention from a group of parliamentarians who are by no means the usual suspects when it comes to international development issues. And we're really pleased to see this committee's report coming out so strongly in favour of strengthening health systems, which, as many of you know, is a key focus area for results. Once again, we'll put some links up in the chat box, this time to three things: an article about the report itself, a link to the report itself, and third, a link to a results blog post from December last year in which we argued for the need for stronger health systems to achieve universal health coverage. It explains why we think that's so important, so do check out all of those links when you've got a minute and you want to learn more. Okay, that's enough from me. I'm now going to hand over to Naveed to do the usual roundup of what's been happening in grassroots advocacy around the country. So Naveed, over to you.
Thanks, Aaron. Hi, everybody. Good to see you all. So yeah, since we last spoke, we've uploaded all the recordings of the sessions from the national conference. So do check out anything you missed, anything you might want to watch again, and feel free to share any stuff with anybody else you think might be interested. So all of that is on our website under the blog section. You should find that easily enough. Oh, and we're going to put a link. Yeah, we can put the link to that in the chat box as well. It was great to catch up with some of you at the conference and also at the advocacy meetings afterwards. So the sort of week and a couple of weeks after the conference, I think the last one was. So for those who weren't a part of it, it was just see if anyone wants to sort of share how they found it. But we had 4 meetings with smaller groups. So we met Susan Eldon, who's a senior health advisor, about the COVID response. We met Marion Fellows MP, who's the SNP spokesperson on inclusive education and disability. We met a clerk in the IDC, the International Development Committee, learned quite a lot of things from her about how they work, I think. And we also met what I think was the entire nutrition team, and a bunch of new staff at FCDO who gave us a lot of information. So that was really successful from my perspective, but I'd love to hear how other people felt, especially if anyone of you is here who it was their first meeting. I'm not sure if there is, but anyone want to say how they felt it went from their perspective? Everyone keeping quiet. That's fine.
Kathy had her hand up, I think.
Oh,
She popped her hand up for a second.
Yeah,
there you are, Kathy. Hello, sorry, I didn't see you.
that's okay. I was just going to say that the nutrition meeting was really, really interesting. And I think that they gave us a lot of background information and they were very encouraging about what results means for them. And actually, it made me almost want to write an extra letter, take an extra action about nutrition so that we get Liz Truss to really understand that if she cares about women and girls, which she says she does, she's got to deal with the nutrition issue. And I was really wondering whether that could be something that we thought about in addition to whatever we're going to do tonight. So that was it. As I say, it was very engaging, and I think both the staff at the office and everybody that was asking questions felt it was worthwhile.
Thanks, Kathy. Yeah, completely agree with you on that. Yeah, so last month's nutrition action is still up on the website. So if anyone feels motivated to do that and hasn't done it yet, definitely still worthwhile. And they were very candid with us about not knowing what their own budget was. We're not allowed to say what it was, a sort of private meeting, so we're not giving details publicly. But I don't think that's a surprise to anyone at the moment. And they were great. Going to move on quickly. So other things that have been happening. Thank you for the action on nutrition that some of you have already taken. We've seen a few of you have sent letters and made phone calls to your MPs. Just a reminder that World Food Day is coming up on the 16th of October. So we're going to be hopefully doing a bit of a push on social media. So if you see any of our channels and you see something you'd want to share, please do. We really want the FCDO to make a pledge in advance of the Nutrition for Growth Summit. We are going to be sending out a social media toolkit next week, so watch out for that. And then also the following day is the International Day for the Eradication of Poverty, so that's the 17th of October, and we might include some stuff there too if we can. So one of the things that seems to be a feature of this year is that quite a few of you have reported getting quite late replies from the government this year. We've seen some quite belated replies on the March action on education and the April action on the G7. So thank you for all of you took time to do those actions and for your patience with the slow replies that have been coming back from government. It does seem to be a feature of the whole government, not just the department. You're not the only one experiencing that. Thank you particularly to Ricky for sharing the response you got back from the August action when we were asking the government to safeguard existing investments, including Gavi and the Global Fund, following the spending reviews. I think Ricky, you got a letter back which explicitly didn't guarantee this. I don't know if any of you have had a similar letter. It'd be useful to see if you have. We think that they're probably referring to the spending review at the end of this month. And it is true that until the overall budgets are announced, the officials are not going to confirm details of programs. But we are genuinely concerned that there could be more cuts, as Aaron said. So it's probably not too late to write in on this issue as well, to demonstrate support for those particular organisations. Into more positive news, we know that the Cheshire, Manchester and London groups have had some recruitment opportunities coming up with some spaces at local volunteer fairs. Did anyone want to say anything about those? Just share a bit about what your plans are. I can't see anyone with a hand up or shouting out. Well, good luck with those events anyway. If you need any support or resources or advice, just give us a ring, but I'm sure those are going to be good opportunities to build your groups. Then one other thing from me is that this month is Black History Month. As an organisation, we celebrated it for the first time last year, and we're hoping to be able to organise another event later on this month. I think Della flagged this last month. We hope we'll have some interesting things to share on social media. If your group is planning anything, please do let us know and we can help to publicise that as well. So my last thing I want to say is that Della is sadly going to be leaving us. She's moving on to Sightsavers as a stories producer, and her last day will be the 5th of November. So I think we'll have one more call with her, But Della, did you want to say anything before we hand back over to Aaron?
I'll keep it really brief because I'll see you all on next month's call, but obviously going to miss everyone massively and hope to keep in touch with you all. But yeah, I'm sure I'll say more next call, but the job advert is up now, and so I thought I should probably mention it. And I guess if you know anyone you think would be good for the job, let them know. I'll put a link in the chat. But yeah, going to miss you all very much.
Thanks, Stella. And I think that was probably all from me. So I think I'm going to hand back to Aaron.
Thanks, Naveed. And just to echo, definitely going to miss you, Della. It's been quite a ride. And yeah, well, more next month, though. We'll save all of the flowers and tears for then. On to the topic of tonight's call, and the topic of our campaign action this month, as it has been on 2 other occasions this year, is fairer access to COVID-19 vaccines. This continues to hold back many lower income countries from protecting their citizens in the way that we've been able to do here in the UK. Results believes very strongly that where you are in the world shouldn't affect your ability to be protected from the pandemic, and that the huge inequality in access to essential vaccines is morally wrong, as well as being counterproductive and dangerous for us all. The reason that this is the 3rd time we've asked you to ask the UK to increase the amount of vaccines we share with other countries is quite simply that so far the government hasn't listened. Well, we're not going away. We're going to continue to call for this until it actually happens. We're also calling for a more sustainable approach to what we're calling vaccine equity, which requires the sharing of intellectual property rights and technologies necessary for countries to develop and distribute their own vaccines rather than waiting for a handout. That's an approach that has so obviously been wrong and which has failed to get the world the vaccines that it needs so far. Back in July, we joined the People's Vaccine Alliance, which is made up of many organisations and people around the world who share this view and are working together to advocate for change. One of the most prominent is Oxfam, who hosts the People's Vaccine Alliance website. Tonight, we're absolutely delighted to welcome Anna Marriott. She's the head of who is the health policy manager for Oxfam GB, and for many years she's led Oxfam's work on universal health coverage. She's an absolute expert on the role of the private sector and companies in national health systems in the global south. But importantly for us tonight, she's also the policy lead for the People's Vaccine Alliance. Anna, it's a real pleasure to have you with us.
Thank you very much. That was a very generous introduction. It's a pleasure to be here.
Not generous at all. Thank you so much for joining us this evening. We're really grateful that you've taken time out of your day to talk to us going into the evening. Let me introduce you to people on this call. You've heard some of them already. They're volunteer campaigners from right around the United Kingdom, from Scotland to the South Coast. Lots of people who are very familiar with advocating on global health over many years, but also some people who are quite new and just starting to learn for the first time about international development issues. Now, we always start off our guest speakers with a few pre-arranged questions, which we've shared in advance, and this evening's no different. But before we get to that, I'd like to ask you to share just a little bit more about your background, what your role at Oxfam involves, and importantly, what motivated you personally to get involved with global health issues in the first place.
Gosh, yes. Can you hear me all right? Because, yeah, great. And if there are connection problems, let me know. So I've been with Oxfam for 15 years now, nearly, which I can't quite comprehend. And I've worked on health for all that time. I guess what motivated me, I tell you what motivated me. I watched this program when I was about 8 years old about these, they were called hover doctors in Papua New Guinea. And these people that go out to the kind of furthest reaches, the most rural communities, delivering healthcare to people who would not otherwise get access to healthcare. And I remember it to this day, and it inspired me, and it kind of led me to, through education, to kind of understand more about health inequalities and inequality in access to healthcare. And I've always been a passionate supporter of the NHS, and the fact that other people in other countries don't have access to healthcare as a right has just driven me to be here. But I have done, yeah, I think that's probably enough about me. But at Oxfam, I lead Oxfam International's health policy work. I've advocated on healthcare for all, against user fees for healthcare, and against the privatization and commercialization of health. And when this pandemic hit, I think, you know, we were working across all of the health issues that were relevant to COVID. But what seemed so obvious from the outset and from our history of working on access to medicines was that there would be inevitable inequality in access to the vaccines. And so we started very early calling for the kinds of solutions that would prevent that from happening. Unfortunately, we're still asking for those solutions and still demanding some change on that front. So I guess in short, it's a justice issue for me. It's an equity issue. I believe firmly in the right to health for everybody, and yeah, I have found that I've remained motivated all this time working for Oxfam on those issues.
Thanks, Anna. This is one of my favourite parts of the call, to hear what gets people out of bed in the morning, and really great to hear your story. Let's get straight to the first of our pre-arranged questions before we open the floor. While we do that, if anyone prefers to text in a question, if you can't get to the chat box, for example, then you can send in an SMS. The number for that is the same as always, 0777 56 11178. That's 0777 56 11178. We'll drop that in the chat box too. But while people are thinking about their questions or starting to gather them, we're going to go to the first pre-arranged one, which is from the Pool Group.
Hello, Anna. I'm Helen from the Pool Group. I'm delighted to see you. I'm glad to hear you're as angry as we are about this lack of sharing vaccines. It's absolutely immoral, isn't it? We want to know really what the most compelling reasons are that we can give our decision makers to support increased manufacturing of COVID vaccines around the world, and if there's any consensus on this.
So, I mean, I suppose, you know, I'd like to say that the moral argument is the most compelling argument, that, you know, the fact that we are in a situation today where in this country, you know, we've got to 80–90% coverage, yet we're only at 1–3% coverage in the poorest countries. And I think never refrain from pointing out those stark inequalities, the fact that just 1% of the entire global supply of vaccines has gone to the poorest countries, while 80% of them have gone to just 10 countries. So I think we do have to keep spelling out the scale of the inequality and the scale of progress in rich countries versus basically a situation of vaccine scarcity in the poorest countries. And the fact that while in this country we're talking about getting back to normal, and I mean, I don't say that lightly, because I don't think we're back to normal, and we're still seeing the numbers of people losing lives every day. But we are, you know, our media is now focused on holidays and how we're going to progress even further back to normality, while actually the virus is raging in other countries, and the horror that we had here is now happening in other parts of the world, and sadly our journalists are turning their back on that. So I think talking about the infection rates, the fact that Uganda lost 50 health workers in the space of 2 weeks when they already have far too few health workers in the country, you know, those kinds of stories are being replicated around the world. However, I find in my advocacy that and trying to direct to get the attention of our decision makers, that it's often the self-interest arguments that seem to have more traction, and you know, we do hear this mantra about no one being safe until everybody is safe, but that is very true, and the fact that we have the Delta variant is, and the huge ramifications that's had around the world, that's a variant. And the longer we have extreme vaccine inequality, the higher the chances of more variants. The huge progress we've made in this country could be unraveled very quickly if one of those variants hits our shores. you know, the way to combat that is to get vaccines to everyone as quickly as possible. And there are ways and means to do that. But unfortunately, our government is one of those governments that are standing in the way of those solutions. The other, I guess, area that I go to, depending on who you're talking to, is the economic arguments. You know, we know that the pandemic continues to cause massive disruption to the global economy, to global supply chains. We even had a case last week where the retailers, the clothing retailers, the apparel sector in the US was lobbying Biden to give more vaccine doses to Vietnam, because Vietnam is in lockdown right now and they're dependent on the manufacturers in Vietnam to make the clothes that they want to sell in the shops in the US. And we are seeing massive disruption to supply chains here and across the globe. Some of that, you know, is for other reasons, staffing shortages, etc. But a lot of it is down to disruption across the global economy, and the predicted cost of that to the economy over the next year is around over the next few years is around $9 trillion. So I think that there is a very compelling case to be made that the cost of vaccinating the world is a drop in the ocean compared to the economic losses that will translate to job losses, that will translate to rising poverty in this country, as well as in other countries, is a pretty strong one, especially for those in charge of those issues in trade and in business. And I suppose the other argument that is difficult to combat is that there are qualified manufacturers coming forward from different countries, experienced manufacturers from India, from Indonesia, from Vietnam, from Thailand, from Brazil, even also in other rich countries like Canada and Italy and Denmark, who are saying, if the rights and the recipes of these vaccines were shared, we could be helping to make them. And they've been saying it again, they've been trying to get access to the technology so that they could help make them, but the pharmaceutical companies are refusing to share. So it's, you know, the fact that there is capacity there, the fact that manufacturers do come forward and say that, I think is also quite a difficult argument to come back at and say, well, no, we won't do anything about that. And then finally, I would say that it is always incredibly important to remember that it was public financing that got us these vaccines. If you look at the case of AstraZeneca, for example, 97% of the funding for the research and development of that vaccine was public. It came from taxpayers. Same for the Moderna. In fact, 100% of the Moderna costs were publicly paid for. And I think it's really important to remember that the big pharmaceutical companies do not invest in vaccines. They don't see them as a profitable thing to invest in. And all the research generally takes place in universities and is publicly financed in small enterprises. So I think that point that it was publicly funded, it wasn't intellectual property, it wasn't patents that incentivized these companies to spend years in, you know, developing the science behind this. It was all done largely in public institutions and then bought up by the pharmaceutical companies. So that foundation of this was a public investment, it should therefore be a public good, I think is important to remind everybody. I will stop there because I can talk for forever if I'm not managed. So
good warning. I'll step in. That was an excellent answer, and frankly, it's good we gave you the pre-prepared questions, because I think you've just given yourself an excellent segue into question 2, which is coming from the Manchester group.
Hi Anna, I'm Laura. It really is perfect segue in. So the second question is, how realistic is it to expect big pharmaceutical companies to put people before profits?
So I think on the whole, it's not that realistic to expect them to do it voluntarily. I think there are a spectrum of pharmaceutical corporations with slightly different cultures on what, you know, how responsible they will be, but and I would put AstraZeneca at one end, and some other smaller companies at that end. I'd probably put Pfizer, if I'm honest, at the other end, in terms of a willingness or openness to being responsible. But on the whole, they are private companies, and their primary responsibility is to maximize profit for their shareholders, and so that's their mandate, and unfortunately they don't operate with a kind of public purpose. It's you know, they'll say that they do, but their primary objective is to maximize profit, which is why, you know, the campaign is yes, pushing pharmaceutical corporations to do the right thing and trying to put as much pressure on them to be more responsible, and in this case, you know, put aside at least some profits for the sake of humanity, and share the technology, share the recipes for these vaccines with the World Health Organization, which can still be managed in a way to get them fair compensation. So it's incredibly important to keep pressure on them, and we learned from the HIV movement that putting a lot of pressure on the pharmaceutical companies and exposing where they are doing the most harm, where they are making egregious profits, you know, that has to be called out. But at the same time, it's governments that set the rules, governments that have the ability to do something different and to change those rules. And so that's why, given that the pharmaceutical companies are not coming forward voluntarily, we are such strong advocates for changing the rules at the World Trade Organization to suspend the patents temporarily, to suspend the intellectual property rules. And if we can get consensus at the World Trade Organization, then we can push forward on that. And it puts even more pressure on them to share the technology. And it certainly removes the legal constraints on manufacturers from elsewhere from making them. I mean, in terms of the politics on the waiver, we're in a really interesting situation where the UK government is increasingly isolated in its opposition to it. A few months back, we had a historic victory in the fact that the President Biden said that he supported a waiver of the patents, a waiver of the intellectual property rules for the vaccines. He didn't say it for treatments and tests, but he said it for vaccines. And the pharma industry kind of was up in arms, reacted with shock and horror, quickly spent a few more million on lobbying. But I mean, and the US has not been as strong at pushing through that commitment to waive the patents, but also bring other governments with them. They have brought a few, like the Japanese government. But we're now in a situation where it's the UK, the European Union, and Switzerland who are the main kind of opposers of this proposal. And within Europe, it's actually quite divided, and it's Germany that has been the biggest blocker. So we kind of single out in our campaigning, we see the UK government, the German government, and the Swiss government as the blockers, and you know, therefore raising the importance of campaigning and pushing for a shift in position on the part of the UK. We've been doing the same in Germany. Is that
It's almost as if we planned these questions, because yet again, we've got another great segue to the third question, which is coming from the London group.
Hi, this is Stephen from the London group. My question is this a political priority for the new Secretary of State? What other potential blockers could be faced in government?
Well, I mean, I have seen no evidence that it's a priority for the new Secretary of State. And it depends which Secretary of State we're talking about. We've got a few new Secretary of States, but I am not seeing a huge amount to reassure me that there is a significant shift in position. But you know, I'm going to refrain from passing too much judgment on that until we've tried our best to influence. On the whole, I would say that the UK government has been very disappointing on this issue. I think every time that we put forward arguments for these structural changes, the kind of two main responses we get are, one, and certainly parliamentarians get and used to get from Matt Hancock, was, but Britain has done the best through AstraZeneca. AstraZeneca is Britain's gift to the world, and it's amazing that they have committed to a not-for-profit vaccine, and you know, we should be proud of what we've achieved through that. I'm not saying I think what AstraZeneca has done is better than the other companies. It's certainly not good enough, and there's a huge amount more that they could be doing. But just responding with that is not good enough. And there are other things that need to be done, particularly when the other pharmaceutical companies are not doing the right thing. So that's, you know, one way that they deflect from these structural solutions. And the other way is that they talk about the fact that they're funding COVAX, which is the international scheme to purchase and distribute doses to developing countries, and that they're donating doses. Well, both of those things are not working very well. The doses are not a drop in the ocean in terms of need that have been promised to be redistributed from the UK, but also of the 100 million that have been promised, only 8% have actually been delivered so far. And then COVAX is also really struggling, and it's just announced that it's £500 million short of doses on what it was planning to distribute this year. And even then it was only planning to cover between 15 and 20% of people in developing countries. So so these two kind of common comebacks from government are not good enough, but they continue to say them. And I think from everything that we hear from all the decision makers that we talk to, the number one priority for this government is making people feel in the UK like we have got enough doses and we've got more than enough in store, ready for any eventuality. And we understand that responsibility on the part of the government. We do criticise for over-ordering at the cost of developing countries, but essentially, you know, it shouldn't have to be a choice between vaccinating people here and vaccinating people in other countries. If we share the recipes, we can scale up the production. And if we'd done that a year ago, then we would be in a very, very different place right now. We would have manufacturers on stream in different parts of the world, supplying different parts of the world, rather than this monopoly model where the pharmaceutical companies unfortunately continue to prioritize selling the vaccine at where they can make the most profit. And that's going to continue until we break those monopolies, create much more competition and diversity in the manufacturing, and which will ramp up supply and also bring down the cost of the vaccines. Sorry that I've kind of gone off track on the government, but I'm not yet seeing a commitment. I see that they remain focused on this kind of narrow responsibility agenda without actually looking and facing down that fact that if they do not change tack, if they do not look to the rest of the world and ramp up access quickly, then it will have failed in its responsibility to protect UK citizens, both from the health, the continuing health impacts, but also those economic impacts.
And that's great. I think it's particularly telling. I mean, I think what you were just talking about was effectively saying, we don't have to pay for everybody, but we need to allow people that can get on and do. I think that's a really key change. We've had some excellent questions in the chat. Really, really powerful. We've still got just under 20 minutes. So we're going to go to open questions where people can unmute and yell. And when we get to that, do remember to introduce yourself. But we'll do a few from the chat first. The text line's still open, 0777 56 11178 there. Actually, Peter, you put your question in first and then amended it. I like your amended question very much. I think it's quite good. Peter, do you want to actually say that, or would you like me to read it out? You're usually pretty good on the unmuting.
Yeah, I've got to find it. If AstraZeneca aren't making a profit, why are they trying to protect their technology?
Do you want me to answer one at a time? Yeah,
please go for it.
It's a really good question, and we ask AstraZeneca that. In fact, I was on a call with AstraZeneca representatives today asking just that, because I think it has a lot reputationally to gain from sharing. I don't think it has given how things have played out, I don't think AstraZeneca has because AstraZeneca does plan to start making a profit from the vaccine at some point. We're very worried that's going to be sooner rather than later, despite its commitments. But we have been calling on them to do that, calling on them to share with WHO, saying that they should, and that if they're not, exactly that argument. So I don't really have an answer for you. I think you've just hit the nail on the head.
Oh Lord.
All I would say is that actually it's Oxford University that hold the patent, hold the intellectual property on the vaccine, and they entered into a partnership with AstraZeneca. Now so Oxford could potentially still share that intellectual property, but I guess it would be breaking the contract with AstraZeneca for it to do so. So we've also been trying to put pressure on Oxford University. So if anyone else can put pressure on Oxford University, then please do.
Have you asked Oxford University if they have leverage?
We have. We don't get to. They're a little bit closed doors with us. Their kind of motivations for going into that partnership were that AstraZeneca could help go to scale, and since they have entered into that, whenever we ask questions like that, they constantly refer us to AstraZeneca. So it's not been an easy journey of trying to put a bit of pressure on them, but we continue to try.
Well done, thank you.
I think we should get an interesting answer to this next question, following on from that last one. Laura, do you want to ask your question, the one you put at 2038?
Yeah, so my question was, are organisations like the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation helping or hindering the vaccine dose sharing?
Very good question. We have lots of interesting discussions about this topic. So it's undoubted, it cannot be denied that Bill Gates has invested a huge amount of money in vaccine access, vaccine development. So there's a huge amount of good work that he and his foundation have done. However, I would say that he has a particular vision of how the world works. And we were on a call with Gates people just yesterday, and they're very categorical that they believe that they believe in market-based solutions. So, a little tweak here, a little incentive there should make the difference. And I think in this case, and they said it yesterday, that they've learned a lot of lessons. Perhaps they were over optimistic. The problem is that Gates has a huge amount of power and influence, and with the volume of funds that they have, so even if their intentions are good, because they have this particular vision of the world, I think that in the case of vaccines, they have been counterproductive in terms of access. Now, I don't say that lightly, because they've helped a lot with the COVAX scheme. I do believe essentially that there is good intention there, but I think there have been moments since this pandemic broke to really get those structural solutions, to get companies to share. And I think that there have been times when they have said no to that, and have had a negative influence. So yeah, I'm being a proper politician and not saying, not falling on either way, but I do think that they've hindered. They've hindered the structural solutions that would have helped ramp up production more quickly, and redressed this kind of stark inequality that we're seeing.
Thanks, Anna. I think that's
the quality of the questions is very high.
Well, yeah, and we don't shy away from asking tough ones, and I think that was a very accurate and fair answer. I think I would agree. The Gates Foundation deserves lots of credit for some of the great things they've done, and in a lot of other ways they are very conservative in terms of the way that systems and structures work, and that's a lot about where they're coming from. So yeah, let's go to Karen from Cheshire. Karen, do you want to ask your question, or do you want me to read it out? If you can unmute yourself, go ahead. Otherwise, if I don't hear you, I'll ask in a second.
Yes, my question is about the booster programme, whether in the UK, whether that's impeding our vaccine sharing. And following on from that, should we, in that case, refuse a booster if we're going to get offered one? And I think it's the Pfizer vaccine that's going to be used for the boosters. And is that one going to be any use in some developing countries anyway, because of its cold storage requirements? 3 in 1 there.
Thank you. Really good questions again. So on the booster vaccine, in principle, so the World Health Organization has said that we should have a moratorium on booster vaccines for healthy adults who are already vaccinated until we've got to at least 40% coverage in other countries. In general, that's something that I think is the right thing to say. I think the science actually suggests that the protection is still pretty strong. I think there are exceptions to that for people with compromised immune systems, etc. But so there are serious questions to be asked about both the public health rationale, because don't forget that booster vaccines are also a strain on our NHS, and there's there are direct implications of a booster vaccine rollout for that huge and ever-growing NHS waiting list as well, when the science isn't very clear yet that these are actually needed at this point. However, I would also say very strongly, to finish that point, I think there is a case to be made at a kind of political and campaigning level that the booster program should be more limited in the short term, and that we should be focusing more on redistributing doses. But my big however is that I don't think the consequences of that are that individual people should refuse a booster vaccine. I think there is, you know, there's this kind of collective responsibility that we all have to protect one another, and also to kind of, I guess, push against the vaccine hesitancy. And I think that if people start refusing vaccines that are on offer and that the government is advising us to take, then I think that is not a great move on a number of levels. So and I guess the other thing I would say about that is that I have always, from the outset, we are in a bit of a different situation now that we do have excess doses. Even if all adults in the UK are given a dose, we still have a surplus that could be redistributed without impacting that at all. So I think we can still be calling for a much greater volume of doses to be redistributed without even impacting on the boosters. So that's on that. On the Pfizer vaccine, whether it's any use in developing countries, so there's, you know, I would say it is, and I think the experience of Ebola, which also needed quite extreme storage conditions, demonstrated that developing countries can do it. It's not easy, you know, it's not always going to be easy, but there will be infrastructure in a lot of the cities that will be able to accommodate the Pfizer vaccine. So there is use for it, and I think that infrastructure can be developed as well. But I would also say, again, to boost the argument about sharing the recipes, if Pfizer and BioNTech, who actually were the ones behind the Pfizer vaccine, if they shared the technology, then you know, in the spirit of collaboration, then other scientists could help develop the Pfizer vaccine even further so that it doesn't require such extreme temperatures. Oh, and I would say that as time has gone on, they have found that the Pfizer vaccine can stay at normal fridge temperature for a month now. So that actually increases the usefulness in more resource constrained environments. You know, a lot of health systems in developing countries, in fact, one of the things that developing country health systems are pretty good at is distributing vaccines in many contexts, not in all. And that there is a basic infrastructure for normal fridge temperature vaccines. I don't know whether there was another question about the Pfizer one that you asked there, but I hope I captured everything there.
Shall we go back? I may have accidentally skipped over Stephen's question. Do you want to ask that question?
Oh, okay. Yes, I noticed. Yeah, so my question was, is there any hope for new and potentially better vaccines being researched which will help to break up the existing monopolies?
Yeah, I think there are. I don't know about all of them, but for example, a new one is just coming online from China, from a company called Clover, that is showing very good effectiveness. There's also an what looks like a very incredibly effective vaccine coming out of Cuba. And Cuba, despite all the odds against such a small country, has invested a lot in research and development, and they now have 2 vaccines that they are going to the World Health Organization for approval. And what's positive about Cuba is that the government has said that it would be open to sharing its technology. It needs some compensation because it's in economic dire straits right now, but it is showing willing that it wants to share. Similarly, there's a vaccine that's been used in India on a large scale, They are going for approval from the World Health Organization, and have also said that they may be willing to collaborate with the World Health Organization to share the technology so that other manufacturers can make it. So there's a few in the pipeline that may be better, maybe more suitable for developing country resource constraints, maybe cheaper, and ideally, you know, with a much more open model to allowing others to develop. But I think, being realistic, those are not going to come online very quickly, and so that's why, you know, we wait and see about those, and we encourage them to take that more open approach. But we also need to get the manufacturers with the approved vaccines sharing their recipes as well.
And we have only 3 minutes left, and we've got so many brilliant questions in the chat. So I'm going to do something quite dangerous, and we'll do some really quick fire answers. So shoot from the hip on these. Just to check, you're familiar with travellers to the UK being denied entry based, well, they're being not considered fully vaccinated if they're not if they're from the global south, from where the same vaccines. Okay, so there's the question there: is any campaigning happening in regards to the UK not considering travellers as fully vaccinated if their dose for the same vaccine we get was manufactured in the global south rather than in Europe?
We haven't campaigned on this issue yet. We have raised concerns about it, but there are a lot of grassroots organisations in the global south that are kind of getting very angry about this and starting to call it out. So I think there's something brewing that's going to become more public.
Great. We'd love for that to happen. When we shared that article in the office, I think that had the most number of immediate responses from staff all over the place of anything we've shared recently. We found it incredibly unfair and upsetting. So a couple of other things. Why is the UK government so against sharing the technology and the recipes? In 30 seconds.
I wish we had a much more thorough breakdown of how much money pharmaceutical companies pay to donors and spend on lobbying. I think that there is a far too close relationship, and they have far too much influence on the UK government, and an ideology that is, you know, it's a conservative government, believes in capitalism.
Last question. There are some new treatments coming up now, not vaccines but treatments. Do we know what the distribution rights will be? Are we seeing the same problems with treatments? Do we have, and I'll extend it, and diagnostics?
Yes, new treatment coming on stream. Most big news from Merck that they have one that's very effective at stopping people being hospitalized and dying from COVID if the treatment is given within 5 days of infection. I am still doing my homework on this one, but yes, those same inequalities are occurring. Merck has said it can only produce X amount by the end of this year or within the next year. The US has already bought up the vast majority of the supply at a very, very high cost of $700 per course of treatment. So there is a big, I mean, it makes the case for the waiver even more, because this would be much easier to copy if the rights to produce it were shared. So this would be much easier than vaccines to cover, to copy, much cheaper. And so we need to waive the patent, get all those generic manufacturers making them, and then we could bring the cost right down, and this could be a really good, it could be a lifesaver for many people that don't have access to the vaccine, but even if they have got access to the vaccine, and they suffer from COVID more severely, this could really help. So so for me, it just builds the argument even more for a more distributed manufacturing, and let's put people before profits.
I know that's a wonderful place to end it tonight. Thank you so much for joining us. I'm so sorry to everybody that we've run out of time. We're actually 1 minute over. But thank you to everybody for your interest and enthusiasm for advocacy on COVID-19 vaccine equity. It's really due to the pressure of campaigners like yourselves that we're going to be able to make a difference here. And a special big thank you to you for spending time with us this evening and for sharing all of your expert knowledge. My introduction was not at all an exaggeration. And I'm sure that that's going to help everybody craft all of those letters that they're going to be sending in. For everybody that's sending in letters, we'd love to see the results of your correspondence. Hopefully they'll respond a bit faster than they have to some of our previous letters, but they definitely do get it. Now, lastly, we've suggested that you write directly to the Prime Minister Boris Johnson this month. And the reason for this is that different parts of the government are responsible for different parts of our requests. So the government departments responsible for vaccine delivery globally is the FCDO. So the person we'd need to pressure is Liz Truss. But the department responsible for intellectual property is the Department for Business, Energy and Industrial Strategy, or BEIS, and the responsible minister there being George Freeman. So some of you might want to target all of them as well, but we'll feel it's important to get leadership on this important topic right from the top. So we're hoping that this strategy works. So Anna, thanks again.
Thank you all. Thank you so much for all that you do. Very, very important work.
That's great. And I'll echo Anna's thanks to all of you. Thanks for your advocacy efforts, and in particular, extra special thanks if you can take this month's action. Good night, everybody. Have enjoyed it.